The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security this week.
Hey, I'm back.
You are back. The last couple of weeks that you've been gone, I had assumed that you were dealing with all the Log4j stuff. I guess that is not the case. Were you hit by that by any chance? You can say yes or no, or blink once, whatever, you know.
Yeah, I'll blink twice. So I'm in trouble.
Oh, okay, good.
Our company was hit by that. We had to, upgrade some stuff. We got it all done though in about a day and a half. So
that's cool.
It wasn't too bad.
That's cool. All right. Very nice. If you don't hear Miss Berlin's voice, and I will tell you, she has one of the worst excuses I've ever seen here. When I asked her if she was going to be here, she said, "No, I'm going to be sleeping on a World War II submarine tonight." And I was like, you could have picked a better better excuse for that. So,
you don't hear that one every day though.
I could have said, "Hey, I'm going to be flying on the Elon Musk train to space or something." That would have made, that would have been just as plausible for me. But no, Miss Berlin's not gonna be here this week. But to make up for it, we've got two awesome people. We have April Wright and we have Alyssa Miller. Thank you both for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
sure.
It's a pleasure.
Yep. I'm sorry, Alyssa. You always seem to be here when Miss Berlin is not. Maybe it's like this Superman thing. Both of you can't be in the same room at once, or you're like anti-particles or something. You cancel each other out.
I don't know, but I'm gonna have to. She's gonna hear from me about this one now, because I'm pretty sure this is number 3 now that I've been on the show, and she's failed on me every time. And the sub thing, come on now, really?
Yeah. She's out with a friend of hers. And I don't know what World War II sub this is. I'm going to have to ask her when she gets back. But I tried looking at all places in the Cleveland metropolitan area. There are World War II subs over there, but none of them looked very comfortable to sleep on. So I don't know if she's doing it legally or not. Maybe, it could be really uncomfortable bed, but yeah.
Did you know that Ohio has a Navy?
Well, I'm sorry. They do.
Ohio has a Navy.
Okay,
this is 100%. I'm not making this up.
Ohio's Navy. It sounds like the time that Thomas Jefferson invited the Swiss Navy to an inaugural ball or something. Ohio Naval Militia. Ohio's Navy since 1896. Holy crap. Okay, well, that's going to go in the show notes, as is our want. Wow. Okay. I'm imagining pirates. All I'm thinking is Johnny Depp with, like wooden boats and stuff, but I could be wrong.
But they're like Canadian pirates.
They're really nice when they take your stuff.
As a fellow Midwesterner, I have so many things I want to say right now, but I don't want to hurt the feelings of the Ohio folks, so I'll just be nice.
Yeah, they've already suffered enough. The Browns lost, and the Bengals are going to make it. But yeah, it's that's football for all of you non-U.S. Americans that are listening. We're in what they call the playoffs right now. But I think we'll probably go ahead and get to the crux of our discussion here. So last couple of weeks, of course, everybody knows has been Log4j, and there's a lot of discussion on Twitter about open source sustainability and developers who are destroying their own code and pretty much burning everything down around them. And we have a couple of things we want to talk about there potentially, but we also there's also ongoing discussions and investigations about things like IoT and stalking and privacy, and those are some of the other things we want to discuss as well. So So I want to start with April, and I want to ask about the open source issues. You're very plugged in with folks in the industry. I don't know if you were affected by Log4j I do know that answer because we talked about it before the show, but I just wanted to ask you that question because I'm a reporter type. What are your thoughts about some of the overarching topics with open source about the sustainability? Developers wanting to get paid and big companies, seemingly taking advantage of that. One of the things I wanted to ask, because we have other points of data here, is how are your feelings about the open source industry and the sustainability of that?
Well, I think that obviously, as we've seen, and as we, by design, open source is free. So people are not making any money off of this unless they start like they go from Apache to like having, real Apache or even Red Hat back before Red Hat was like a company. It was just an operating system. So, you can build things around open source, but not everybody wants to do that. I honestly think that the biggest problems that we have right now in terms of any code anywhere is more integrity than anything else. I think that in the past we've been looking at availability for code confidentiality for code. Availability too is very important, but probably third on the list. But we've always tried to keep code secure by obscurity. We try to make sure nobody gets access to the code, but what if somebody does? It's going to happen. I mean, repos are leaked all the time. People get access to things, so you can't just rely on that. I think it's better to try to prevent us from being, or anybody from being the next SolarWinds by, and part of the challenge with open source is that doing code reviews and affording tooling for SAS scanning, for example. These things cost money, and if you're not making any, then it doesn't make any sense.
Right. Alyssa, sorry, Mr. Bretsch, go ahead.
As many people used this open source that we talked about, the Log4j, I mean, tools like Veracode didn't find it. So,
right. Right. Alyssa, just what were your thoughts when all this Log4j stuff went down?
For starters, holy crap. But no, seriously, honestly, I was in a kind of I guess, compared to my peers, kind of a privileged position. And I say that because we did have software composition analysis in place in our pipelines. And so this thing, it kind of started to show up on Thursday. On Friday that week is when like everybody finally started like realizing, oh my God, this is really bad. And so, I mean, I've been telling people, like, by that Friday afternoon, we already had a list, across a large enterprise organization. My division, I think we've got, it's hard for me to classify into apps anymore because we do a lot of functions and, the whole serverless thing. So, but I mean, I had a list of, all of our assets where we had Log4j. And so from that perspective, it was, a lot of organizations weren't in that boat, right? A lot of people, their first response was get all of our developers together, find out where we have Java, and then let's find out which of those Java apps have, Log4j, et cetera. So, I do feel fortunate that we had that type of, that we did have that visibility. But it's been kind of frustrating because I've seen a lot of the, the renewed scrutiny on the open source community. And, I think some of it's fair and some of it's not, right? I mean, first of all, you mentioned this concept, and I've seen other people say it about, organizations are taking advantage of the open source community. Like there's this evil corp that's, we can get free software, so let's use that. You talk to most organizations, and they're not so thrilled about the idea of having open source in their software. But let's look at the open source community for a minute. All of these development ecosystems have their package managers. They have their repos out there. It's very easy for me to go in, and whether I'm in Java with Maven or I'm using, I'm in Node.js, and, whatever you're doing, you're using a package manager and you're able to easily pull that code. So, it's not like there's this huge, like, they're being awful and they're using this code for free and then demanding the world of these developers. More of it is just ignorance that, a lot of these organizations just don't realize the level to which they're using open source libraries, and because they just don't simply realize the ease with which their devs are doing this, and with the pressure that their devs are under to create code and create it quick. And this is how you do it. You don't reinvent the wheel. You go grab. I was a developer 25 years ago is when I got into this world, right? And even back then, it was all about reusability. So I think, that's been kind of frustrating. And then we talk about the quality of the code. And we talk about, these developers aren't paid, and they're volunteers, and so they're not doing as much. And some of that's legit, right? Like, if they had SaaS tools and they were running that, would they be better off? Maybe. But you know what? This was a freak out because it was a widely used package, absolutely. But this could have just as easily been Microsoft. This could have just as easily been a bug in Windows, and it could have been just as difficult to patch or update Windows as it was to go out and find it in your own code and patch it in your own code. So we kind of blast the open source community like it's the Wild West and everything's awful in open source. The reality is it's awful everywhere if you want to look at it that way. I don't think it's awful. I think these things happen. They come up. They're hard to find because you've got multiple developers working on this thing. It'd be the same thing if Microsoft was doing it. Or Apple, or Netflix, or whomever else. We can run through the name. I don't want to just pick on one, but they all have large numbers of developers. Any one of them could introduce something like this, and it's so I appreciate the scrutiny, but I think some of the judgmental attitudes out there are really unwarranted.
I think it's unfair too, because Microsoft and Apple and Meta and these other companies have the funds to throw into fixing this, staying up all night for 4 nights trying to fix something and getting it out there. I think that the biggest difficulty was not so much that it was such a bad vulnerability, but it was decentralized in such a way. So let's say that there was a library in an operating system. You could pretty easily patch that because it's just one library for all the apps to use. Whereas this was not quite like that.
Right. I was listening to, I was catching up on my podcast when I was out for my walk, and Risky Business Hat was talking about that. And they said one of the things was Log4j is not a first level dependency. You're going to have to go like 4 or 5 dependency levels down to find this. So organizations, Alyssa sounds like she's, got a fairly, mature organization with understanding dependencies. There's organizations that don't even know that they're using Java and Chef or, something like that. They don't know how far or how deep that rabbit hole goes. And, having, when I realized that, this isn't a first tier, dependency kind of thing, how far down are you going to go before you realize you've got Log4j, or, which systems have it and which ones don't? And, is it easily patchable, or do you have to maybe wait for a third party vendor? And I think that was the big thing. Some of the people were saying it was going to take years to fix because you may not be able to patch that one library very easily, or, you may patch it, but break something else, which would be even worse. You got your hands kind of tied because you can't do anything. So before we move on to the IoT stuff, Mr. Betcher, I wanted to ask you a question. You're a filthy software developer, but you did not go the way of open source. You made a product, you licensed it. Why did you decide not to release? You have a freemium model, but which is probably better for open source. But why did you decide to not release it as an open source tool and decide to charge for it? Other than being a
so that
capitalist.
We could charge for it would be the main reason. But we believe that most of the time when small companies release their software, or even just developers who are really good at what they do, and they create really awesome tools, the community at large just downloads it and uses it, and not so much spends the time to make it better. You know, it's usually the developer or maybe one other person that, you know, gets involved in making the tool better, but the community at large really just takes the code and uses it in their own stuff. Or so we didn't want that. we weren't, I mean, the odds that someone would help us a lot, or that a lot of people would look at the code and make it better, we thought were slim and not worth releasing.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. You know, that's your code, and you know it works out for you. You have a freemium model, obviously. You have a free version and then a paid version. I was wondering about, because a few years ago in Texas there was a thing about the breweries where they couldn't actually charge for alcohol. I think that's the thing. And the way the breweries got around it was they released, you know, they gave the beer away, but to actually drink the beer you had to buy the glass. You know, and what I was wondering about was if open source could do something similar where we give the code away for free, but if you want the license, you know, which is the, you know, we give it to you as is or whatever, that little, you know, 5 lines of code, which apparently there's enough apps out there that have, you know, 5 to 17 lines of code, you could probably do that. But to get the license to be able to use the code with that source, you know, you'd have to pay for that 5 lines of code. And I was just wondering if that was, you know, I was just thinking out loud, but I was just thinking about, you know, that'd be the cup in this case instead of the beer. So,
I can, along those lines, there are, I guess, licensing that says, okay, if you use this code, you have to release your entire software, right, publicly. So there is a little bit of that, and I think you'd if you were able to just audit everyone's code out there that does not release theirs publicly, I'm sure you would find a lot of code out there that should be released that isn't, because they have used code with those particular types of licensing, and yet they don't release their code. And it could be no one even bothered to look or check.
Right. That makes sense. Go ahead, April.
Oh, I was just thinking about how Russia had that requirement where software companies had to submit their code to the government basically to be reviewed before they were allowed to sell it. I mean, I imagine, of course, most of that is probably not open source. So imagine the wealth of vulnerabilities they may have found just by having access to the source code.
Right. I want to think, again, going back to risky business, I think I heard a news story similar to where China was doing the exact same thing. It was like, if you send your code to the Google Play Store or something, they want to see your code before it gets uploaded. And I'm not sure if it's how Russia was doing it, or if there's, you know, obviously there being privacy issues potentially, you know, are you even checking to see if something's being added after the fact or if there's any changes? But yeah, cool. Anything else before we get off the open source? Alyssa, hello. Hey.
I mean, I don't know. I just look at the whole thing, and I think there's a misnomer here, you know, that, well, if devs in open source were paid, we wouldn't have security problems in open source. And again, I struggle with that because we have massive organizations that pay millions of engineers and QA staff and everything else, and they still make mistakes, right? Like, so I mean, that's where, now, by the same token, do these people deserve to get paid for the stuff that they produce? Probably. You know, I mean, there's no two ways about it, but now you have to question, well, why would they then create this thing and give it away for free? I mean, that is kind of their decision, right? I mean, you made the software at the end of the day. And I mean, it's impressive. I mean, first of all, thank you to the maintainers at Apache, because they did get in there and fix this thing fast, right? Like, I mean, they recognized the minute it kind of blew up, they recognized what the problem was. They recognized that it was that big a deal. And they got in there fast, and they spent a lot of hours. They made multiple updates. I mean, we're on version, 2.17.1 now, and it was 2.15 when this whole thing blew up, or 2.14 even, I think, right?
Yeah, I think there's been 4.
Yeah. So, I mean, kudos to them, and it's great. I mean, but, you hate to have to see those types of heroics, and then consequently those types of heroics down the chain. So I think the one thing that could happen here, and this is where people get into this kind of, the evil org is using it without, or taking advantage of it. There are those struggles when you do find a bug or you do just create additional functionality that you think should be part of a package of, can we submit a PR back to the maintainer? And now that puts organizations in I've been in these discussions where it's like, okay, well, if we do that, are we liable? And of course, so who do you ask? You ask the lawyers. And what are the lawyers going to say? If there's any hint of possible liability anywhere, don't do it. Right? I mean, they shut it down immediately. And so it is tough in those scenarios. But I think overall what this thing highlighted, at least in my opinion, from everybody I've talked to, in whether it was small organizations or big enterprise organizations like mine, is that the vast majority of people, especially outside of the technology division, do not understand what open source means to their environment. And that's where I think, Log4j maybe pushed us a little bit. Like, I think it moved that needle a bit. There's a bit more awareness now. But I think as long as we've been having these discussions, and I can remember them back to the late 90s, we still don't really understand it at a business level. What does this mean to us? What does it mean if we say no open source? Can we even do that? Or what does it mean if we allow it?
Right. Yeah.
Are you saying that when you say they don't understand how important it is, are you talking about like how much open source code they actually have and critical to basically their bottom line?
Yeah. I mean, how much open source they have, where it can be found, how complex the problem can be. I mean, you mentioned earlier, just the idea of these transient dependencies that might be 4, 5, 6 levels deep in a dependency tree somewhere. That's complexity that a lot of organizations don't understand. A lot of organizations don't even fully understand that, like, look, Apache is not a vendor. You're not paying them. You have no contractual relationship with them whatsoever in this case. So they're not a vendor. You can't think about this like third-party vendor management. This is something completely different. Right. But you also might run into your vendors who also are using this and who are dependent on it. And all of those things came to light with this Log4j, because it was like, okay, we can't just look at our code. We have to look at third-party packages that maybe we purchased that might have this. We have to look at commercial off-the-shelf software that we're using that could have this. We got to talk to our SaaS vendors because they may be, dealing with this as well. We need to understand their posture. So I think just the overall awareness of how just integrated into everything open source is became a lot clearer during this particular response.
Yep, that makes sense. Yep. I'm very much appreciative of y'all's point of view on this. I thought since we had you here, we would ask that question. We already asked, and just as an aside, I did send an email to the 3 Log4j developers to see if they would come on the show. I have not heard anything back yet. I don't know if I will hear anything back yet, but I wanted to, see if I could get it from the open source developer point of view. Just to see what it was like for them, if it was, pure hell, or, what they would have done different next time, or, but I did reach out to them and ask them if they wanted to come on the show. And I have not heard anything back. So their companies, because, Log4j is a side project for them, they may not be allowed to. I think one of them works for Spotify, so I'm not exactly sure. I found that I didn't have to hunt that up. That was just on Apache's website. So but one of them works for, they all work for companies, so they may not have the ability to be able to actually speak there. So, but I just wanted to let everybody know I did give them the option to come in and talk to us. So
that was our show for this week. You can find show notes for this and all of our shows at www.breakingsecurity.com. You can also find an RSS link on the site to add to your favorite podcatcher. You can find all of us on Twitter. Miss Berlin can be found at InfoSystir, INFOSYSTIR. Mr. Betcher can be found at BetcherPwned, BoettCherPwned. And you can follow me on Twitter at Brian Brake, BryanBrake. We have a Slack. Come join us on our Slack. A lot of great things going on there, a lot of channels of various InfoSec-related subjects. You can get an invite on Twitter by emailing our official Twitter handle for the show at BrakeSec, BrakeSec, or you can email us at bds.podcast@gmail.com. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters for their monetary assistance by offsetting costs involved in putting out a weekly show. Zoom fees, Libsyn hosting, domain purchase, renewal, equipment upgrades, time and effort building the community we have. We appreciate all of your help and support. If you'd like a t-shirt, stickers, coffee mug, or just to show your support for the show, you can check out our TPub site, www.tpublic.com/user/BDS podcast. We thrive on your feedback. A quick 5-star comment on iTunes or Google Play Store or your favorite streaming service, Spotify, Pandora, what have you, go a long way to gaining us additional visibility. It takes no time at all, and we appreciate your help in spreading the word. That was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Be safe, be well, be kind to one another, take care of yourself because you're the only you have, and we'll talk to you again soon.